when God blesses you, when God delivers you, when God forgives you of your sin, he gives you a flat-out new identity. You're no longer your mistakes. You're no longer your failures. Your name is no longer cheater, even though it deserves to be. Your name is now, as it was for Jacob, Israel, one who strives with God. He got a new identity. This is the good news of the gospel, that God comes and shows grace. It wasn't that Jacob deserved it or anything like that. But the blessings he'd worked so hard for and lied for, he realized they were sinking. They were built on things that could be taken away at any moment through his failure, through his death. But the blessing that Jacob received freely was a solid blessing. And it was a solid blessing because God just said it. He didn't say, Jacob, if you fill in the blank, then I'll name you Israel. He said, what is your name? Cheater. Not anymore. Your name's Israel. The solid blessing that Jacob was really looking for in all of his stuff, he was looking to find his identity in everything and anything he could get his hands on, even if it meant lying and cheating and stealing. Then God comes and says, the blessing you really need is for me to give you a new name. The blessing you really need is to not be labeled a cheater, a sinner, deceiver anymore. The blessing you need is for me to forgive you and give you this lasting name that can't be taken away by your good or bad works, but it's just your name, your new identity, because God said it was. This is grace. Jacob did nothing to earn this. God just said, no longer Jacob, Israel. See, the truth is for us too, we like I said, we try to find this identity. We try to find the blessings and things, and you've got to realize it's on sinking sand. You got to realize you need a solid blessing, and the solid blessing that you need, the one that's foundation is on the rock, is Jesus. Jesus is the one who takes away your sin by his work on the cross. Jesus is the one who gives you a new identity as saint. We need that solid blessing, something that can't be taken away. I'll put it like this. Your identity, that's the idea of this blessing in this text. Your identity, who you are, how you're defined, it needs to work today and last forever. Some people are thinking, I'm going to do this, or I'm going to do this. And they're looking to those future things, and that'll establish who I am. No. What if you die now? What if you never achieve those things you're looking for? What if you do achieve them, and then like Jacob, you sit down and realize, I could die, and these are all going to be taken away? Your identity needs to work today and last forever. And the only way you can have a new identity is in Jesus. The only way your name can be changed, the only way you can be delivered from the punishment of your sin and receive this new blessing and you're in God's favor is by the grace of Jesus Christ. And now we end with, we've got to get specific. I'm just kind of out there in the clouds right now, right? You need a new identity? How can we get this solid blessing? Here's how we can get it. Look at the story. Then Jacob asked him, please tell me your name. But he said, why is it that you ask my name? And there he blessed him. So Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, saying, for I've seen God face to face, and yet my life has been delivered. The sun rose upon him as he passed Penuel, limping because of his hip. Therefore to this day the people of Israel do not eat the sinew of the thigh that is on the hip socket, because he touched the socket of Jacob's hip on the sinew of the thigh. How can we get this solid blessing? How can we get, for us, this new identity in Jesus? Look at how Jacob got his. And the answer is, Jacob saw Jesus. If you haven't figured it out, this is Jesus making a cameo appearance before he comes as a man. He just comes down, the God-man comes down. Jacob is blessed and receives a new identity because he saw Jesus in Jesus' weakness. Now track with me. Like Jesus, he saw Jesus and Jesus' weakness? Yeah. We know that this is the God-man, this is Jesus wrestling with Jacob, right? Jacob should have been crushed. Jacob should have been crushed. I mean, you want to go one-on-one in the octagon with God? You're toast, man. And Jacob knows that he should have been crushed because at one point, bloop, hip dysplasia right there. Rest of his life, he limps. But he saw Jesus and Jesus' weakness, and that changed him. That Jesus could have crushed him at any moment, but he didn't. So that means that Jesus simulated weakness in order to provide blessing to Jacob. He came and wrestled with him, became weak, didn't crush him, held back from crushing him, wrestled with him, and then blessed him. So Jesus became weak to give a blessing to Jacob. And Jacob saw him in his weakness. He knows this is God. He names the place Peniel, which means the face of God. Saying, I'm naming it this because it's at night. It's like, I saw God face to face. And he gave me a new identity. I saw God face to face. He became weak. I should have been crushed, but he became weak so he wouldn't crush me, but so he would deliver me. See, the reason Jacob wasn't crushed is because centuries later, a man named Jesus would come. And Jesus would be crushed for Jacob. That's the reason that Jacob gets to have salvation. That's the reason Jacob gets forgiveness and Jacob gets a new identity, is because Jesus would come again. The God-man would come down with Jacob, and then he would come back again about 2,000 years ago, and he would live among us. God would become a man, and he would go to the cross being punished, being crushed, even for Jacob's sin. Anyone that's ever been saved in the history of the world, even before Jesus came in the flesh, was saved through the work of Jesus. Isn't that crazy? That's what Romans 3 says. God saved people in the Old Testament because he was going to take out their punishment on Jesus, and Jesus was going to be their substitute too. So Jacob receives this salvation through seeing the God-man in his weakness. And really the truth is, you and I receive that solid blessing, that new identity in Jesus, when we see Jesus in his weakness. When you see that Jesus became weak to go to a cross for you, when you see that Jesus poured himself out, Jesus emptied himself, he didn't come just as this sovereign, I'm going to crush everyone. He came weak, and he won through losing. Jesus on the cross, it seemed like the greatest defeat in the history of the world, but we know Jesus gave himself up for us. We know Jesus gave himself up so that we could receive the blessing. I think Tim Keller points this to Jesus probably the best of anyone that I've ever heard. He says this regarding this text and Jesus. It says, Jacob held on at the risk of his life to get the blessing for himself, but Jesus held on at the cost of his life to get the blessing for us. See, Jesus held on, and Jesus went to the cross, and he didn't have to stay there. He could have done anything he wanted. He gave himself up, and on the cross, he was holding on so that he could get the blessing for you. Jesus was taking the curse you deserve so he could give the blessing he deserves to you. And when you see Jesus becoming weak, when you see that Jesus traded places with us on the cross, this is how he forgives us. This is how he gives us that new identity, because Jesus took on your old identity as a sinner. And he went to the cross and he died, treated as a sinner, being punished by God as a sinner. And then 3 days later, Jesus got out of the grave as the victorious Savior. And since he traded places with us on the cross, since he took to death, our death, he's able to give us life. Since Jesus became a sinner for us, he gets to call us saints. And when you see him in his weakness, that changes everything.